Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Kenton Hornbeck of the BeckDeck podcast, joined alongside my co-host, Logan Decker. Logan, how you doing this week, man?
Doing good this week. Haven't nothing crazy going on in the works, just a standard week. I do have something exciting to share, is that we got our first sponsor coming in, and Kenton's representing. Our first sponsor is Blue Chew, and Kenton decided to take one 30 minutes before the pod started. So I was wondering, how you doing, man, and do we need to take a break at some point in the pod for you?
I'm stiff as a steel beam in Pittsburgh in 1941, man. I mean, I am just rocketing up those charts. I think Blue Chew really has done a lot for me in the past 3 days, and it's really just made me uncomfortable sitting around. I've questioned what kind of pants I need to wear. So I don't think you should do this recreationally necessarily like I've been doing, but I think if you really have some sort of, let's say, medical issue, you don't have to consult with your doctor, but I definitely think you should at least take some precautions. The guy at the gas station was really kind of trying to sell me on one of his in-house products. I trust Blue Chew with this type of thing and their team of scientists and engineers they have back there. So anyway, I mean, yeah, again, still going strong. I expect this to at least last another 45 to 50 hours because I've had more than one. I've had about 7. And I don't think you're supposed to take that many, but honestly, I'm just rock, flag, and eagle. I'm ready to roll. So anyway, have you taken any Blue Chews yet? Have you experimented with this?
I have not, because when you were telling me that you've been doing this for, it sounds like 24 hours consecutive straight, I've been, quite frankly, a little scared. I'm glad that you're still alive. Maybe
my blood feels thick.
But I'm happy to hear that your heart hasn't exploded yet. But no, we are not sponsored. But shit, let's get this video taken down because Blue Chew doesn't like what we're talking about. That's what.
By the way, Blue Chew, this is all alleged. We are allegedly in Minecraft taking Blue Chew for 3 days in a row. But, anyway. I wanted to tell everybody something potentially exciting about the podcast, and it's more on the production side. So, Logan and I may have a new intro song starting next week. That's been written and produced by my little brother, Grant Hornbeck, who is a listener of the show. He shared a new intro, kind of riff on his guitar, and he produced it on his own. So I think what we're going to do starting next week is start leading off and ending the show with this new riff. And I think it's going to go really good. I think everybody's going to really like it. But I wanted to give Grant a shout-out for doing that. And it's just going to add overall to the vibe of the podcast. So, Logan, do you have any thoughts?
No, we really do appreciate it. Shout out to Grant. It was something that I wish we could have put together for this pod. It was just due to some personal things going on in our lives. We just were not able to really sit down and do this in a timely manner on top of the pod. So I'm hoping, I think we're both hoping, and I think it'll be very realistic to have it put up by the next pod. And it'll be exciting because it is a little bit longer than what we have. So maybe this will kind of, I was thinking maybe we put some images that we have, whether it's sports-related events or us together, kind of in the initial slideshow with the intro going on. So I think this could open up a little bit more for production value and just kind of maybe letting our listeners get a little bit of a peek on what we have done personally with sports or fun times we've had together. So
I totally agree. And another thing I want to add is I want to emphasize this. This isn't something, the intro song, that's not something Logan or I could have done ourselves. I'm not musically inclined. I don't know how musically inclined Logan is, but adding that is going to increase the production value of our podcast, certainly. And it just goes to show even the small community we have, either amongst our friends or listeners, that you guys are able to contribute to the podcast as well in any way, and we think that's awesome. We know we have some people that always comment on underneath every episode. I mean, we don't even have thumbnails really yet. So the fact that our listeners and our community already is able to go out of their way to make comments, get us some likes, produce an intro song, that goes a long way, and Logan and I are always very appreciative of that.
Yeah, no, it's very cool, and can't wait to see where the channel keeps going with support from you all. That being said, we are not too far from the NFL draft. I believe we have another 3 or so weeks coming up. It'll be in Pittsburgh this year, and we wanted to take some time out to kind of do a little bit of, maybe not a deep dive is what I would call it, but kind of talking about some of the top prospects coming out of the draft, just at various positions, and formulating some different opinions, especially around some of the social media that has come out this week, which has been, in my mind, wildly entertaining. But I think it's necessary to have a conversation like this. And usually something happens social media-wise coming into the draft just because, hey, football's kind of dead, and sometimes some news gets put on blast, justifiably so, or they're kind of creating storylines that aren't necessarily there. But we've had a good one this past week, and we'll dive into that shortly. And I figured, what is the most important position in football? It is the quarterback position. So I figured, each one of us would talk about arguably, or I should say not even arguably at this point, the top 2 quarterbacks out of this class, and maybe a wild card pick for a guy we might see name pop off a little bit later down the road in the league. But it seems like almost universally everybody considers Mendoza, the quarterback from Indiana, national championship winner, to be the number 1 player off the board here. I'll go ahead and kind of dive into what I like about Mendoza, maybe some weaknesses that I might see with him, and if I think he's justifiably the number 1 overall pick for the Raiders. Mendoza and the Indiana Hoosiers had I don't even want to call it Cinderella season, because that was a very talented roster, but I don't think there's a single person in the world that would have thought that Indiana would just go toe-to-toe with every single program this year and have the run that they did. They had an amazing year previously, but considering Indiana football in the grand scheme of things is not a powerhouse. We often think of them as a basketball school, and they've kind of shattered all previous expectations with this. And I'm excited to see what Indiana does going in the future. And they've definitely going to have quite some talented members joining the draft in the NFL this year. But with Mendoza specifically, in terms of the build, it's your prototypical. He's a 6'5", 236 pounds. I would not say that he is the fastest quarterback out there. I wouldn't expect him to be at that height and that weight. So he's no Josh Allen, but he ran a 4.85 at the 40. What he does really well is he's a great pre-snap processor of information. He's always done a fantastic job of looking at coverage shells and finding ways to get the ball into soft spots into what the defense is giving them. He has some fantastic arm strength, and you could see how many tight window balls that he'd had throughout the year, back shoulder throws, and he's definitely had some wide receiver talent to help him there, but he is always, more often than not, placed the ball where only his guy can get it. He does a really good job with the intermediate throws, which is something that a lot of quarterbacks coming into the draft have, let's just say, have had criticism of those intermediate, over-the-middle type of throws, where a lot of guys prefer maybe the short routes, or they like to go long, but they stay outside of the hash marks. And he does a really good job in the pocket. And I wouldn't say escapability is his strong point, but he does a really good job of navigating and stepping up when he needs to avoid the pressure. He's not going to be the guy that you see too often or not, especially at the NFL level, where he's just going to escape and make a play going down the field. I think he can generate time for himself, but this is not going to be a guy that you regularly see like, oh, he scrambled out of the pocket like Hurts and got a 15, 20-yard gain. That's just not his game, but he does a really good job of creating space for himself. And then, of course, you can make the argument that in terms of some of the games that he played in with, he played against Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, Miami. This is just all in the postseason, let alone some of the Big Ten competition that he ran into. He has a well-established resume with some of the teams that he plays in this past year, and he has years with Cal as well as being a strong quarterback prospect coming in. I would say some cons, and these are very, very small things, is that Indiana runs a very heavy kind of RPO system, and it makes the scheme simpler. Now, Mendoza was able to really kind of capitalize on the scheme and create some magic, but there could be some time for Mendoza to kind of adjust to an NFL-style offense, especially with Kubiak's offense, which is definitely not as RPO-heavy as Indiana's is. Sometimes, and this part isn't my own words, but there have been some critiques that he has sometimes a tendency to lock on to his primary target, which obviously can be problematic in the NFL, where if you're keeping your eyes on one guy, you're not shifting, linebackers and safeties and trying to create open space. So he's heavily relied on his talent and the scheme itself to make openings within the defenses that he's played so far. And we've talked about in the past how complicated NFL defenses can be, and that's why we're seeing kind of this resurgence or maybe lack of development from recent quarterbacks, is because the schemes at the different levels are so different. And then, of course, when he does get out of the pocket, his accuracy is a little bit off, but I would say that's about with every single quarterback, so I don't put that heavily against him. And I mentioned he's not a dynamic scrambler, but he does have some functional athleticism. He can get out of the pocket, extend plays. It's just inconsistent. And I do think that at the NFL level, he's going to be one of those guys that when the pressure's on, he's going to get rid of the ball quicker than trying to get out of the pocket, just because he lacks the physical attributes to, let's just say, avoid a sack from Myles Garrett versus the best player on the field. He would be Reuben Bain, at the college level. So, and he's most likely going to the Raiders, who I think have done an okay job of patching up their offensive line, but he's going to have to be quick and decisive, especially in that division with the Chargers and the Broncos. And we'll have to see what the Chiefs put together. But he's most likely going to be the day one starter just based on the moves that the Raiders have made. And we'll have to see. He's got we'll see what they do in terms of the wide receiver spot, but he has weapons with Genty and Brock Bowers, so it's not like he's hanging out the dry, and they've invested some money on that defense. So I think the Raiders they've been doing a good job trying to set up their future franchise quarterback to have some success, but he's definitely going to have to hit the ground running here. It's one of those where I do expect him to get better as the year goes on, but I don't think he's going to come out right out of the gates and be having 300-yard games or, 3 touchdown games. You're going to see a guy who I think is at least from what it seems like, he's definitely in the quarterback room. He is definitely a heavy mentality guy. He studies. So I think the more action that he sees, the better that he will get. So I'll hand it off to you. What are your thoughts about Mendoza? And I'm sure you're in the agreement that he's going to go to the Raiders as well as the number 1 overall pick.
Yes, I think he's also going to be drafted number 1 overall. I don't think there's that much debate about that. The Raiders really need a quarterback, and he was the best college quarterback this offseason or this past season. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's set and done, right? Maybe not. But yes, in all actuality, I really like Fernando Mendoza. I think he is going to be taken number 1 overall. I want to ask you this, and then I'll pick up the mic again. Are we sure? I feel like he kind of like the Bryce Young thing. I talked about last podcast. He was the best college quarterback. He won the national championship. But yet, I don't feel like he's elite. And I feel like we're just kind of penciling him in because of this draft. And I don't say that to neg Fernando Mendoza, who I do think – I saw an article right before we hopped on comparing him to Falcons quarterback Matt Ryan, who was drafted number 2 overall. And I actually kind of like that. Now, is he going to be Matt Ryan? I don't know. But I think if he ends up being Matt Ryan, once his career is all said and done, I think that's a big win. And I think you can justify taking that player number 1 overall. But do you feel like he is a true number 1 prospect?
No, I think if, let's just say, another team was in the spot, let me say if the Titans were in the spot, would they do this thing where, let's say the Cardinals did a handful of years ago when they drafted Josh Rosen and then they took Kyler Murray number 1 overall? No, because I don't think Mendoza is this, generational quarterback. I think if you put him up against now some of this is based off of NFL play, but I'm like, let's just say he's in the same, I still think if he was in the same draft class as C.J. Stroud would be taken before him. I would think. I think he's the best in a relatively weaker quarterback class because, hey, some of the top guys that I think could have also been first-round picks, Oregon quarterback, Ole Miss quarterback, they would have been first-round picks. They decided to stay another year. Some of the other guys that were hyped coming into this class, hey, Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, Drew Aller out of Penn State, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, they have all had, let's just say, disappointing seasons or injuries have significantly hurt. Because coming into this year, it was going to be the talk of, Drew Aller. I remember Drew Aller was supposed to be the number 1 quarterback coming out, and they were talking about the guy from Oregon, and Cade Klubnik was supposed to be a first-rounder, and all of a sudden, based on what had happened throughout the season is that all of a sudden all these guys who were potential first-rounders, I don't know if they're going to go in the 3rd or, potentially the 4th round just because of how bad some of their seasons were, how bad some of the injuries were. I think Mendoza solidified the number 1 pick just because of the results of his, outstanding run. It's one of those things where I think this is the value of the intangibles are coming in a little bit heavier. Do I think? I think he's going to be successful. I just don't. I would agree that he is not. If you put him on against, pull the past 5 draft classes up in quarterbacks, I don't know if he goes number 1 in any of them, to be quite frank. But I do think he will have success, if that makes sense. Because I think Matt Ryan, you brought that name up, that's a fair comparison. And you're like, Matt Ryan. And it's like, hey, if the Raiders had a guy that was Matt Ryan's capabilities and success, that would be the best quarterback the Raiders have ever had. So I think they would be extremely happy with that result. But
yeah, Matt Ryan's a fringe Hall of Famer. I mean, he won the NFL MVP in 2016. Yes, he got memed on by the New England collapse in the Super Bowl, but like you were saying, I totally agree. He would be the best. Having a Matt Ryan would be like the best quarterback the Raiders have ever had, even amongst their Super Bowl winning quarterbacks. So I don't think that's that much of a hot take. I agree with you that Mendoza is not a generational prospect in the same way other quarterbacks in the past have been viewed. A lot of people compare this quarterback class to the 2013 class, which did not really produce anybody that was anything of note except Geno Smith, who was initially projected to go high in the draft, if not top 10, ends up sliding in the draft, and the only first-rounder taken that year was E.J. Manuel out of Florida State by Buffalo, I believe. He played in Buffalo for like 2 years, but then he played for Oakland and ultimately flamed out of the league. He was not very good. Now, Geno Smith is probably going to be the starting quarterback for the Jets this year. But if Geno Smith, who's like a 2-time Pro Bowler, is the top quarterback in your draft, that just goes to show the level of talent and depth that was there. I don't believe this quarterback class is as bad as 2013, and one of the reasons being is Mendoza is a clearer, number one to me than a guy like a Geno Smith and certainly E.J. Manuel. I think, honestly, I feel like throwing talent-wise, he's not as good as this player I'm about to compare him to, and I don't think he will necessarily have the highs that this player has, but I could see his career progressing in a type of way like a Jared Goff. I could see him really struggling next year. If not really struggling, being outright bad at certain points in time, because his physical talent is not such that it will override some of the learning, mistakes that he's going to make throughout the course of the season. Where I think Mendoza and also Jared Goff, and why I'm comparing the two, where I think they're going to, really make their money, or Mendoza is I think he's smart, and I think the locker room is going to really rally around him. Now, if he's not able to put it together in the first 2 to 3 years, I think all of the stuff becomes really corny, and that could make a toxic locker room really quickly, especially in Las Vegas where the fans are a little finicky. But I do think Mendoza is going to be able to learn on the job. He's going to get the opportunity to really get bumped up, take some hits, but ultimately learn how to play quarterback in the NFL, because the Raiders aren't really on a timeline that some of these other teams may be on. I mean, they are they're the dregs of the league. They're literally at the bottom of the barrel. So all they can really do is put their eggs into the Fernando Mendoza basket and then build around that with skill players and offensive linemen. And I think in 2 to 3 years' time, I think he's going to be kind of like a Alex Smith, Jared Goff, Matt Ryan, that tier of quarterback. Kirk Cousins, maybe you could throw in there. He could be a starter in the NFL for a really long time. Is he going to be a Hall of Famer? I don't know about that. I mean, his money's going to be made by being efficient, making the right throws, being a player that sometimes puts his body on the line in short yardage situations to galvanize his team and convert those kind of plays. I don't think he's going to be ripping 500-yard games and 5 touchdown passes and just be the swaggiest white boy in the league. I just don't think it's going to happen. But with all of that being said, the reason I brought up Fernando Mendoza's kind of status as a number 1 overall quarterback in relation to Bryce Young and other people is that this past week or the past 2 weeks, I can't remember when the comments were exactly made, but ESPN analyst Dan Orlovsky, former NFL quarterback, famously stepped out, or infamously stepped out of the back of the end zone while playing for the 0-16 Detroit Lions in 2008 to cause a safety, said that he believes the consensus number 2 overall quarterback in this draft, Alabama quarterback Ty Simpson, is actually better than number 1 overall Fernando Mendoza. And I don't know if I agree with that, but I do actively think it's not a bad thing to just pencil in Fernando Mendoza as the best quarterback in this draft in terms of the conversation goes. I don't think Dan should be I don't think he was negative or necessarily throwing Fernando Mendoza under the bus, but I think it's made the conversation around this number 1 overall pick pretty uninteresting because we're the Raiders are just going to take Fernando Mendoza, whatever. Now, this could just be part of the take machine, but here is what he said essentially about Fernando Mendoza, is that Ty Simpson is the best quarterback in this class over Mendoza. He can make more real NFL throws, and he had to, quote-unquote, carry his team more than Mendoza did. Now, in hindsight, I understand this take kind of because Mendoza was making all the throws. Indiana was very experienced. They were very talented. They beat a lot of good teams, and it didn't feel like, even though he was the best player on the team, it didn't necessarily feel like he was carrying them the whole season. He was just part of a really, really, really good team, essentially. And then he also said he values Simpson's performance under pressure more and freelancing outside of structure more. So with all that being said, I kind of get where he's coming at, but man, people really came after him. They really came after him. People were not happy about this. And I've read some conspiracy theories online that because Dan Orlovsky is represented by the Creative Arts Agency, CAA, and Ty Simpson is also now represented by CAA, that he was going on TV kind of backing his agency client, his agency brother, over Fernando Mendoza, who's represented by Excel Sports Management. I think that's a little bit of a stretch. I just think he kind of came on air and wanted to give an off-the-cuff take, heat up the take machine. People ran with it. He did it. He played it like a fiddle. Good for Dan. I don't think it's necessarily correct, but I do think there is value in having a farther conversation about Fernando Mendoza's ceiling and Fernando Mendoza's ability to translate to the NFL. And I think Ty Simpson, it's not even really about him necessarily. He's just kind of the conduit to having that conversation, I guess, which is what more people want to have because, like I led off the segment, people are just kind of penciling in Fernando Mendoza. It feels like a little bit, you remember in 2020 when, and this class was way deeper, but Joe Burrow was just kind of being penciled in to number one, although he did come off a national championship winning season, threw 60 touchdowns to only 6 picks, 6,000 yards. It's like totally different, but I still remember people like kind of questioning his hand size, his arm strength, all of this stuff, and the conversation always kind of went back to his intangibles. People love him. He's a good player. He plays with his heart on his sleeve, and he's a smart guy. He's calculated. That's ultimately won out, and Joe Burrow would be a consensus top 5 quarterback in the league if he wasn't so banged up all the time. I think Fernando Mendoza is kind of this is kind of a lesser version of that conversation. It's just that there's no other quarterbacks in the class like Tua Tagovailoa or Justin Herbert or whoever else to compare Joe Burrow to. And I don't think Ty Simpson is on the level of any of these guys. And quite frankly, a lot of the things I said about Fernando Mendoza and you have said also apply to Ty Simpson. And there's clearly a reason why people prefer Fernando Mendoza to Ty Simpson, because Ty is more – they're both projects. I mean, the only people who are going to pick him in the first round, at least in my opinion, are like the Rams or the Steelers, a team like that who can afford to kind of sit him on the bench and have him learn, as opposed to just putting him out there and letting him play. That's kind of my thoughts on this year's quarterback class, specifically about that conversation Dan Orlovsky had with everybody this week that riled everyone up. Do you have anything else to add to that? What do you kind of think about my synopsis there?
I think you're accurate. I don't – in terms of the Dan Orlovsky, I think he would have been totally fine with this take, and I don't even argue with his take because it's not fun to have everybody's voice be the same in the room. I think what encapsulated that entire moment is when he was on the Pat McAfee show, and then he asked them, he's like, what big games has Mendoza been in? And I just told you the playoff run he went on and him being in the Big Ten. And I'm like, that is the worst possible thing you could have said. And it became the internet meme moment. I don't think it was necessarily a bad take to sit here and say, it's like, hey, let's not forget about Ty Simpson and what he does. And I you know what? I can kind of see where he's coming from, because I can make the argument that in terms of an offense, this might be the worst Alabama offense we've seen in the past decade. This is hands down the best or worst running back performances we've seen from Alabama, which is shocking. And then Alabama's wide receivers, they're one of the highest, I want to say, in rates in terms of drops. So Ty Simpson was kind of the motor of the team here. And what I will say, what I do like about Ty Simpson that a lot of college quarterbacks don't get anymore is that they basically gave him the keys of the offense where they let him do pre-snap adjustments. They let him basically put guys in motions on his own. He was kind of the coach-quarterback combo in this offense. So it's like, okay, this guy has a lot of more experience than most quarterbacks coming out in terms of, hey, you're running the offense. If you see something, change it to your benefit to get the ball moving. And most of the times it worked out into his favor. He wasn't a guy, let's just say through 9 games, 0 interceptions, 21 touchdown passes. So it wasn't like he was consistently making poor decisions out of this. And if anything, that shows to him because he's, like 6'1", he's like 205, 210 pounds. He's a smaller quarterback.
Yeah.
So he's got to take advantage of any other aspect of the game he can. And when you're going against college defenses that are largely static in nature, what you call is what you get. You don't get to change it. If you have a guy that can handle that type of workload in changing the plays on the field, that's a huge advantage to your team, especially a team that is in the bottom. I think we talked about it, months ago when the playoff, Alabama had their rushing attack was in the triple digits in the entire Division I football rankings. So that's how bad of a running game that they had, which is unheard of. And I do think that is kind of my biggest con with him is that he's not a big quarterback. He kind of, in terms of the player comp coming out, he kind of reminds me of Tua a little bit with the build. And, hey, they both went to Alabama. Hey, they largely only played 1 season. So you want to talk about experience. I'm like, Ty Simpson's only started 15 games because he went to Alabama as a freshman. He just sat in the cooker the entire time. More of a traditional quarterback in that sense compared to most other quarterbacks in college football. But the other thing I'd say, because of the smaller frame, I mentioned the interceptions, but hey, this dude has fumbled in 5 consecutive games down the stretch at the end. And maybe that's him holding on to the ball, trying to do too much in these playoff games or in the conference championship. But he has a different strength, but I would also agree with your take to say, hey, if Mendoza is comparable to Joe Burrow but just on a different tier, then I would say Ty Simpson is comparable to Justin Herbert and Tua coming out also on a tier below. So I do think this quarterback class as a whole is probably, I would honestly agree, like people keep comparing it to the 2013 class. I think that's fair in terms of the quarterback talents. I do think there's some interesting guys in here. Depending on Drew Aller gets healthy from Penn State, he's going to sit and take some time. I mentioned to you before the pod, this guy's a physical specimen, Taylon Green, quarterback from Arkansas, 6'6". He runs a 4.36 40. He's top, 90 percentile in all measurables at the combine. This guy's Anthony Richardson, but you're going to get him in the 5th round compared to the 1st round with Anthony. So there are some guys that have some talent in here. And I don't want to dismiss Eric Nussmeier, Carson Beck, Cade Klubnik, but these outside of Ty Simpson and outside of Mendoza, none of these guys have a chance to start day one, and probably for most of them, we may not get to see an opportunity for them to start a game in the NFL. But there is some talent here. It's just these guys are going to have to be in situations where I could see half of these guys, it's like, the Rams draft them in the 6th round, or, Pittsburgh drafts them in the 5th, or, they're going to go to these established franchises that maybe have some older quarterbacks that are like, okay, let's just take this guy. He's there. Let's let him sit in our system for a year or two, and let's decide if we like him or not, or if we're going to draft somebody else in a year or two. So, not saying we won't see these guys, but I do agree with your assessment of the comparison to 2013. And overall, the quarterback class is weak, but it's not that I'm out on them. It just might be the non-traditional routes for many of these quarterbacks to have any type of sunlight in the NFL.
Yeah, unfortunately for Taylor Green, Anthony Richardson has ruined all future Anthony Richardsons for me. So, and with a higher profile than Anthony Richardson had, I think it will be a true project for Taylor Green. Also, why draft Taylor Green when you could literally just have Anthony Richardson? So I think that's the question. But I do share your intrigue. I think his physical skills are almost certainly translatable to the NFL in some context. Maybe not to be a Bill Polian, but maybe not even at the quarterback position. And I don't mean not playing quarterback ever, but I wish.
I agree. I think you could put a man, hey, here's your wide receiver, here's your tight end, here's your running back, here's Taysom Hill type situation.
I was literally about to say that.
And I'm like, I think he would be fine with that role. And I'm like, I see it. I'm like, he's big enough to do whatever position he wants to be an offensive skilled position. I think he could be a conversion guy too. And if I was him, I'd be like, that's fine with me.
Let's expand on this really, really quickly. Not to go off on a tangent, because I know these guys' bodies get beat up. But I think, and this is what Tim Tebow wasn't willing to do, that could have literally made him a legend. So good. I think he could have been perfect for this. Taysom Hill did this later on. There's been some other smaller examples of this, but quarterbacks are kind of like prototypical athletes, especially in the NFL. They're like big, they're fast, maybe some of them can catch, but they're usually like pretty tough for the most part. They got big legs, big asses. They're able to, you could put them in a certain position to succeed on offense without necessarily throwing the ball. Although you could run kind of some sleight of hand and have them throw the ball occasionally, and that works out. I mean, Taylor Green, that's a perfect kind of – he could play that role super, super well. The guy that always comes to mind is Taysom Hill, and I wish more players were willing to do that, or more coaches were willing to use that kind of Swiss Army knife player within their offense, because I think it's an untapped market in the league. We've seen it work. We've seen it have success. I guess it just comes down to contractual stuff. How is this guy going to get paid if he's not necessarily a quarterback, which commands the most money? He's doing all of these snaps at running back and wide receiver and blah, 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 and he gets banged up, whatever. I think that's kind of preventing these type of, players from flourishing more. But anyway, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the reason why we don't see it anymore is because, hey, it's an ego thing, and guess what? If you're a quarterback who plays more tight end, but you can line up at wide receiver, they're probably going to want to pay you as a tight end, because tight ends make the least out of those three positions. And, it's not that, hey, Taysom Hill gets paid a pretty big bag. You're not going to lie. I mean, if you look at his career earnings, I'm like, it's not like he's just sacrificing his body for, pennies on the dollar. But I think that could be, hey, if you want to have a long time in this league and be viewed as a commodity, potentially right away, then maybe putting yourself in that position where it's like, hey, because of the way that I'm built, I can play 3 different positions on offense for you. And depending on what team you go to, this could be a way for you to be like, hey, let me find a way to show you why I deserve to stay on the roster, and also have the ability to show you my passing ability. So if it ever comes down to it, I can play quarterback for you too. Or maybe we do some special packages where I'm the running back, and I don't know, let's just, you got, I'm just trying to pick a random quarterback out that has some type of athletics. We got Justin Herbert there too, and it's like, oh wow, it's like, what are you going to do between these two guys? They both can take off and run. You definitely have a preference between the two. Or it's like, oh, let's do some. I think it opens up your playbook a lot to have a guy like this that would be willing to do it. The problem is it's the ego factor and wanting to get paid. But I would say as a as a rookie, it's like, hey, guess what? You're going to get paid the same amount regardless of what position you play. Why don't you just show that you're the biggest asset you can? That way you can get a paycheck when your rookie contract expires, especially with a guy like Taylor Green who, listen, depending on where you get drafted, you might only have 4 or 3 years on this rookie deal. So you got to hit the ground running to show that you have value. And then otherwise they'll just cut your ass to save some money, or they'll just let you rot on the bench, and then they'll let you walk after 3 years.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's a good point. I always kind of compare these guys to a certain form of like utility player in baseball. Hey, this guy plays third base, shortstop, second base. He can also play both of the corner outfielders and outfield positions, and he's a decent hitter. I think obviously it's different in football because of the hits you take, and it's just a different game. But the utility guys on offense, I think, are super, super interesting. You have them on defense too, but it's more of a body type thing. This guy can play safety and linebacker potentially, those kind of deals. But with that being said, I think it's good to move on here to some of the other positional groups and people that are interesting in this draft, because I know we spent the top here talking about quarterbacks, but what's fascinating about this specific draft is that it's very, 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 very deep, just not at the one superstar position that everybody, talks about. So we talked about Mendoza and a little bit about Ty Simpson and Swiss Army knife players, but where this draft really shines and will shine, I think, going forward is the guys at 2 through 10, or even potentially beyond that. I think you're going to find some really good guys in the second round. You have really good, there's some good defensive ends out there. I think there are a lot of good defensive players in general. You have some big offensive linemen. And let's start here. Your team has a top 10 pick. In fact, they have the number 4 overall pick. And with this draft being the way it is, and it's kind of like having the number 3 overall pick, because you're not taking a quarterback here. You already have Cam Ward. That position is done and settled. You got your coach. So you essentially have the number 3 overall pick here. I'm looking at a mock draft here that has Texas Tech senior edge rusher David Bailey mocked to you. Who do you want? Who do you want in this draft as a Titans fan? And then would you be upset? What player would you be upset that they took here, even though it's kind of a luxury pick at this point in time?
I don't think, out of all the mock drafts and stuff that I've seen, I don't think I would be upset at really any pick that I've seen projected. I guess if I had to pick one, and this is not based on the player, it's more of the positional need. If we drafted Jeremiah Love, who's a fantastic running back out of Notre Dame, 4.36, he's one of those guys that, like, hands down, he's the best running back in the class, and he's justifiably a top 10, potentially top 5 pick. If you want to put him up in the hall of, like, oh, he's a Bijan, here's a, all these other guys, big names in the league, I'm not against that. I just don't think Tennessee is at the point where they can justify drafting a running back when we have so many other holes on the team that we would like to fill. I keep wrestling. I wouldn't be upset if it happened, but I would be like, I hope they know something that I don't, kind of situation. Because I'm not sitting here defending my current running back room, but we just have bigger holes than need, especially if you're like, hey, the goal is to give as much support to our franchise quarterback with Malik Willis. What we have to do is, okay, we either give him more protection or we give him receiving threat. And I've kind of come back around to the idea. Initially, before free agency, I would have agreed, like David Bailey, Reuben Bain, but we just made either trades or we paid guys, and we picked up 3 to 4 defensive linemen in this offseason. So I'm like, at this point, I'd rather have another position, a linebacker, a safety, a wide receiver, somebody on the line to help out. But if it was me at wide receiver, I probably would take wide receiver Carnell Tate from Ohio State. And I'll be honest with you, he's not necessarily my favorite wide receiver off the board. My favorite wide receiver in this whole class is Mekhi Lemon from USC. The only problem is we, for whatever reason, we're still holding on to Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is a slot guy. And Mekhi Lemon is a slot guy. And it's like, oh, great, we're just going to keep running out these short wide receivers. Just draft the number 1 overall outside receiver, Carnell Tate, who's projected to be a top 10 pick anyway, so it's not like a reach. 4'5'3", 6'2". He's coming from this Ohio State, which is just wide receiver U at this point. He's very aggressive up in the air. He has, I think I have the actual number here. He has a very low drop rate. He has 3 drops all year. I want to say, I don't have the number written down, but he has over a 50% win rate in contested catches, which is insane. If that number were to convert over to the NFL, that would basically be a top 5 in that position in the NFL. He's had the longest 5 touchdowns of 40-plus yards this year. It's, I will say he's a little bit lighter, but if that's my complaint, you can put on weight as a wide receiver. I have no big problem with that. It's like, hey, let's get as many weapons as we can to our quarterback here to have him have success. Now, I will say overall talent-wise, do I think, I love David Bailey. I think he's going to be a phenomenal. Hey, if you can get a defensive end that is 251 pounds, 6'4", and runs a 4.5 40, that's insane. And he has the production to back it up. But, hey, I love Arnell Reese. I love Sonny Styles. I love Caleb Downs. It sounds like I'm an Ohio State fan, and that hurts me, but, God, that team was so damn talented. I would take any one of those guys. But if you're asking me, gun to my head, who are you taking? Let's just get another receiving threat because my team is notorious for not being able to sign or bring in wide receivers. Just spin the pick. Get your guy, Carnell Tate from Ohio State. That's who I would take to fill this number 4 spot overall.
I think that's interesting that you would go that way, but it does make sense. The Titans do need good skill players. They famously whiffed last year with the Calvin Ridley signing and free agency. And I've never been a big Calvin Ridley guy in general. He was a little older at Alabama.
Also, one thing, not to interrupt, but I kept saying Malik Willis. I meant Cam Ward. That hurts my soul that I was doing that. I don't know why I was thinking about Malik Willis.
Fake fan alert. Uh-oh. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, in fairness, though, Malik Willis did get drafted by Tennessee, and they did trot him out there for a point in time. So I think that's not the worst cardinal sin you could ever make. But, I would tend to agree with what you were saying. I think it would be interesting for them to go and get a dynamic wide receiver when it's such a position of need, especially when you have a young quarterback like Cam Ward who needs another player out there on offense to supplement his production. I think if they did take Jeremiah Love, it wouldn't be a bad pick, but it would feel like a... Do you remember when the Giants took Saquon Barkley at number 2 overall? And you're like, it's hard to call this a bad pick because Saquon Barkley is probably going to be really, really good, albeit he did end up being really good. But did they actually need him there? They could have addressed another position of need rather than just swinging on a running back. That's kind of what that situation feels like to me. So if they did end up taking Love, I think it would ultimately work out if he's able to be healthy. I just, like you were saying, I don't think that is the biggest position of need. You don't have to worry about who I'm going to take this year in the first round because that's not going to exist anymore for my team. We've aggressively given away our first-round picks in the middle of last year. So I am yet a voyeur to this year's very interesting draft. And not to bring it back to the Bengals, but I love talking about the Bengals, as you guys know on this podcast. They're honestly my favorite team to talk about just because of the proximity to the fan base that we both share, but also I like them. They're interesting. I want them to be good. They have players that I like, except T. Higgins apparently. But everybody else I'm pretty cool on, except maybe like Shamar Stewart too. But like the Bengals have the number 10 pick here, and we can kind of work up from here. We don't have to do a mock draft. I'm trying to highlight, I think, the most interesting kind of places in the top 10 here.
I can make your answer short. If he somehow falls, which I don't think he will, but if he were to fall to them, if the Bengals don't draft Reuben Bain Jr. at the 10 spot and he's available, you need to burn the stadium down. Okay? I would still take Reuben Bain over any defensive line prospect in this class. I don't care about the short arms. I don't know if you saw the videos of him. I believe it was this week or maybe a little bit last week towards the ends of it where they were doing D-line drills. And holy shit, for him being as big as he's 6'2", 263, he runs a 4.72. Oh my God! Like seeing this, they talk about the bend of a defensive tackle, defensive end. This is probably one of the first players that I'm like, oh, I understand this now, because I've never seen a man that big be horizontal with the ground while still running. Like he's perfectly parallel, cutting across basically this dummy. And then they showed, it might have been David Bailey, it might have been somebody else, but I was like, holy shit, the difference between these two. Like Reuben Bain is going to be a monster no matter if you line him up at D tackle or nose tackle or if you put him on the edge. He's kind of one of those, if you put him at a 4-3, he's not going to be the nose, but he is going to be one of your interior defensive linemen. And not to cut you off, but that's how strong of an opinion that I have with the Bengals here is because that's where you need help at. You need a guy that can stop the run. You need a guy that needs to put pressure on the quarterback. You build from the front and go out. And right now, you still have holes there. You want to get a guy that I think will be productive for your franchise, let's just say for a decade. That's how strongly I feel about Reuben Bain.
If he was to fall to them, I think I agree. You have to take him. I just think he's so good that it's going to be a really to me, there's no way one of these other 9 teams
agree. I don't
whiffs
think
on this.
He's not going to fall. He's not going to fall, but Bengals fans tend to think that he will. So I'm like, all right, let's entertain the idea. If he's there, you take him. But I still think there's potentially some teams that would prefer him over David Bailey. And David Bailey's being projected as a top 5 universal pick. So I'm in agreement. I think he's too talented to fall to the Bengals, but if he does, you take him. You don't even think about it. You don't take a phone call. You just take him.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the best 5 players in this draft easily, if you are even throwing Fernando Mendoza in there. But I think, like, that would be a dream scenario for Cincinnati. I mean, I think a lot of teams would have to mess up in order for him to get there. However, he is in that range. The mock I'm looking at has him going, and this is a Bengals fan's worst nightmare. I want to set this up really quick before I tell you who I think they should take. So the Bengals have this, like, we know this, they have this, like, soft, kind of dormant rivalry with the Chiefs. All the Bengals fans hate the Chiefs. They do. It just is what it is because of those 2 years where the Bengals were in the mix. The Super Bowl year, the Bengals ended up beating the Chiefs to get to the Super Bowl, and then the next year, the Chiefs barely beat the Bengals to make it back to the Super Bowl. And then they've had some other regular season matchups that have been wildly entertaining, and every time they play, it feels like some kind of rivalry game. Lately, that's been a little dormant, but lo and behold, who has the pick right before the Bengals? Who is here to steal the Bengals' generational defensive end prospect from them? None other than the Kansas City Chiefs, who at the mock I'm looking at are taking Reuben Bain right before the Bengals. It would be the most Chiefs pick of all time. This is the definition of Kansas City Chiefs. Coming down, flying down from the heavens, kicking the Bengals in the nuts for absolutely no reason. I mean, now luckily for Cincinnati, this draft is deep enough to where even if this guy is picked before he gets, to pick number 10 or whatever, even if he's picked off already, I do think the Bengals are going to be able to salvage this pick. I think fans of the team would feel a little more comfortable if they were at 8 or 9 here. But with that being said, the guy who I think is very interesting that they need to really take a look at is Caleb Downs, the safety from Ohio State. It's not even really about the Bengals addressing a position of need with the safety, although it is a position of need. I think the Bengals really need to take the best player available here that's not the running back, I guess, or wide receiver. Like, they're not going offense, but really any of these defenders, I think they should go with Caleb Downs because he's a very, very high IQ player. I think he's going to be able to contribute, like, immediately. You could say the same about Ruben Bain. Either one of these guys, I think, are going to be immediate contributors to whatever team they're on, and they're going to have production to back it up. Unlike last year, when they took Shamar Stewart, and this guy was a virtual zero out there. He did absolutely nothing. They took Miles Murphy a couple of years ago. He did absolutely nothing in their rookie year. The Bengals need a rookie that's able to contribute to the defense immediately. That's a guy like Ruben Bain. That's also a guy like Caleb Downs, and I think it would automatically make their secondary more dynamic and give them a little more flexibility on what Al Golden's able to draw up on defense. Now, maybe either of those guys aren't there. Who should they pick? Well, I'm looking up here. I mean, this guy is not going to fall to them. I could not imagine this guy falling to them, but if they were able to get a guy like a Sonny Styles, too, he'll probably go top 5. That's a player they should look at if he falls in the draft. Another player that people have talked about, hey, what about addressing the corner position? Jamad McCoy from Tennessee. You also have Mansour, is it Delaney from LSU. If they drafted a corner there, I wouldn't necessarily be upset. But, with these two guys here, with the 10th pick, it would be a massive win for the Bengals if they're either to get Caleb Downs or Ruben Bain at this selection. I think those guys will be contributors right away and immediately raise the profile of their defense.
I think the most realistic pick for the Bengals would be either one of the corners that you mentioned, McCoy, Delane from LSU and Tennessee, just because I don't think there's any way in hell that anybody mentioned David Bailey, Sonny Styles, Cardinal Tate, not that they would take Tate, but Caleb Downs, Ruben Bain. I don't think any one of them falls that far. I think this is kind of hopeful thinking from a franchise that's their fans are like, please, like there's 8, guys that are almost seen as like potential generational just from the defensive side here, or to at least be very, very productive just to walk in the door, and you're sitting at the 10 spot. So that's a little scary, and you're hoping one of these teams mess up. And I'm like, well, I think some teams that won't hurt you is the Raiders and the Browns, because I think they're both going offense. And I kid you not, and you've seen this, every mock draft that you've pulled up the past 2 weeks, who do the Titans drafting? It's Jeremiah Love. It's almost like it's a consensus. So I've kind of booked that in myself. I'm not upset with it, but I would be shocked if, let's just say, I'm going to pick either Ruben Bain or any of the Ohio State top-tier defenders fall that far. I'd be shocked, honestly. So I'm like, hey, Bengals fans, get ready to take a corner here. Or maybe your franchise does something freaky and they take, like, Kenyon Sadiq or something like that, which it's not upsetting, per se. But I don't think they would go that far.
I'm with you really quick. I think what Bengals fans really need to bank on is they need dudes to go offense here. So you automatically eliminate the number 1 overall pick. Then this is where it gets interesting. A team like the Cardinals, who do they take? Who do they go? Where do they go? Do they take like the Miami offensive tackle Francis Muyang? I can't even say it. Mauigoa. I'm going to call him Francis M. I'm sorry, everyone. And then, like you were saying, what does Tennessee do? Do they take off another defender there, or do they go running back? Those are teams. I think the Giants are more or less going defense, that you could pencil that in. Browns offense, they have to do that. Now this is where it gets interesting right here. One of these teams is going to take Carnell Tate. It could be the Titans, like you were saying. It also could be New Orleans here. You had number 9 overall pick, Kansas City. Who are they going to take? That's interesting. They signed Kenneth Walker in free agency. I've seen Jeremiah Love slotted to them before. Now with that signing, I think that's more or less off the table. It's interesting, but they need teams to go offense. They essentially, I would just keep your fingers crossed if you're a Bengals fan. I mean, this could either be a really good night for you, or this could be a really disappointing night. And what I will say to finish out this quick Bengals thought is that, like you were saying, the most realistic picks are the corners here. Usually the mocks I have looked up are the number 11, number 12 kind of prospects, McCoy, Delaney, going right around that range for the Bengals. And it's not that – I think if the Bengals picked either one of these players, that it would be good. It would be good. It would help their defense. However, it would also feel disappointing, and it wouldn't even necessarily be their fault, because the opportunity to draft some of these guys like Reuben Bain or Caleb Downs or whoever that are kind of up in the higher tier of this draft is so enticing. Like, could you swap picks here? Like, I almost feel like it would be a disappointment if one of these corners, if that's who they had to settle with. I think these guys in the top 10, minus the quarterback, I mean, these are generational guys, and they need that player. They can't just have another all-right corner. They literally need somebody good. Now, they also signed Brian Cook in free agency. I know that might not be the position of need, but, man, rolling out there with Brian Cook and Caleb Downs, I mean, that is really good. Or if you have Reuben Bain out there on the end with Boye Mafe, I mean, now you're really, really talking about something good here. And I think the Bengals coming out of this with a corner, when this isn't even necessarily a corner draft, you know what I mean? Generally, these generational corners are getting picked like top 7, 8, 9. Not that you can't find good players, but I would be disappointed if I was a Bengals fan, and that's who they ended up getting, because the top 10 of these guys are so high level, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess I would propose this question as well. If you are a Bengals fan and all those guys are gone, do you take your corner or do you potentially trade back? And I know the Bengals don't want to trade back. I know the fans don't want them to trade back, but I'm like, hey, if you were so dead set on one of these guys and they're not there, do you kind of take your lick, or do you like, well, let's trade back in the first round, maybe get another guy in a position we need. May not be the same tier, but maybe we get some more picks out of it, you know, because, hey, you got a lot of problems on that defensive line, or not defensive line, the defense as a whole. And maybe if you wanted to be like, maybe we'll just kind of throw people at the problem, and hopefully more of them stick with more chances, or maybe this is your chance to be like, okay, we'll get some more picks in, and maybe we'll invest in the depth of the offensive line just in case they get banged up again. Or, you know, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think it'd be definitely disappointing. I'm disappointed whenever my team has traded in the past, but sometimes it has to happen. I don't know what your thoughts on that with the current roster of the Bengals and the various area of needs for this team on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I think it's crazy to say, and as of now, it's weird. I think the Bengals have done a good job in free agency. I think I dinged them when I talked about them last time about them signing Josh Johnson, as I thought that was not a great move. Obviously, this is like a tertiary position, backup quarterback. It is important for the Bengals because Joe Burrow gets hurt so often, but they ended up recommitting to Joe Flacco. I think that was a good move, smart move by Duke Tobin. I think the guys they went out and got in free agency so far, Brian Cook, Boye Mafe, they got Jonathan Allen from Minnesota. I think all three of those are really, really good. And now this offseason kind of hinges on this number 10 pick. Make or break. If they knock it out of the park, if one of these guys falls to them, I would be very, very excited going into next season if I was a Bengals fan, even if there still are some holes, albeit linebacker, big one. You know, they still have some holes at linebacker. You know, their corners are fine. They still need more. They still need more. I think that's not necessarily a position of strength for them, but they're not bad. They're kind of existing out there. But and I'm not even really sure how good of a defensive coordinator Al Golden is. Let's be completely honest here. I mean, he didn't have a lot of talent to work with last year, but let's not sit here and pretend like he didn't make some bad decisions either. The offense, you can put it on cruise control besides the offensive line, which I still think they should go out and find some depth. I would not be scared of adding depth if I'm the Bengals on the offensive line, but that is clearly not the position of need for you. I'm not taking any luxury picks. I'm going straight high talent defenders, and like we have both kind of said here, the guys you want are Reuben Bain or Caleb Downs. And then I think if you take Mansour Delaney or Delane, it feels like a disappointment, even though he might be a good player. Brian Kelly, they have good NFL players. Like, he's not. This is not we're drafting some question mark. I think generally, taking a DB from LSU is generally a win for a lot of teams. But with all that being said, that's kind of where I'm at with the Bengals and positions of need. I think they've done a good job this offseason. They really need to hit this out of the park in order to really count this offseason as a win. And I would not be against them getting aggressive. I think you really should not let the cards fall to you. I think they really need to consider this. To me, we say this every year. This is a make or break for them. We'll move on here in a second. This is a make or break for him. If they don't do this right, you're going to be here, and if Joe Burrow gets hurt or whatever, if they don't make it to the playoffs or they don't win the division, with all this uncertainty, you're going to be hearing Joe Burrow trade rumors. You're going to be changing your coach. There's going to be so much noise. I mean, you might even hear wide receiver trade rumors about one of T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. They need to be aggressive here, and I think getting one of those two guys that we've been talking about is maybe you flip a fifth rounder. Maybe you do what you got to do here. I think they're going to be in good position to, if they get this pick right, actively compete for the division and maybe even potentially win it with the question marks in Baltimore. Pittsburgh's had a really good offseason. I agree with what you said a couple weeks ago. I think Cleveland is an embarrassment. They will probably be better, but again, I can't commit to anything Cleveland's doing without their quarterback position being figured out. So that, to close on my Bengals thoughts, I mean, potentially get aggressive. You have to knock this out of the park, and hopefully one of these two elite players falls to you. But if they don't, I would consider being aggressive to put yourself in a position to draft two guys who I view as home runs. Like, I think these guys are – there is no way, unless their legs fall apart, that they're going to be bad.
Yeah, it's the Bengals could do a lot here, and this is with any team. So I'm gonna do a little bit of a zoom out here. So even though this draft, some people are comparing it to the 2013, just in general, because of the quarterbacks, and let's just say in the running back selection, there's maybe only 1 to 2 guys. In terms of if I wanted to mention one other name in the running backs area, I'd say Jonah Coleman from Washington is interesting. You want to talk about a Maurice Jones-Drew clone, might be him. But even the wide receivers as a whole, it's like you kind of have these 3 guys, and none of them are like Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson coming out. They're not elite. But you could potentially see, and I know this is a really big praise, but out of all these other positions, you could see a lot of potential future All-Pros coming out, because this defensive class, I cannot understate enough. I read it on Twitter somewhere this past week, where somebody said that this may be the linebacker class, like in the past 25 years. Like, this might be the one. And I'm just not even saying linebackers. So I'm going to do a quick rundown. But there's some linebackers here. C.J. Allen out of Georgia, he's going to be a late first-round pick. Anthony Hill Jr., one of my favorite linebackers, one of my favorite prospects in the entire draft, is going to be going in the second round, fringe first round. Going down the list of Jacob Rodriguez from Texas Tech, Jake Galladay from UC, Josiah Trotter from Missouri, Gabe Jacobs, who's a little bit more of an edge than a linebacker, but they have him listed here as that from Illinois. You have Devontae Lawson from Alabama. My point is that, yes, you have in this draft between Bailey and Reese and Styles, these guys are like elite of the elite of this position. But every single one of these guys that are following that looks like, oh, they might be there available near the mid to late of the second round, these guys can start on your team right now. And these guys can develop. They have every single one of them. Shit, I think the slowest one on the list it's Gabe Jacobs, but he's more at the line at the 4.8. Everybody else is a 4.6 or higher at the linebacker. That's insane. I had mentioned last week that this, in terms of different positional groups, DBs, defensive line, linebackers, that they all had the fastest 40 times in combine history as a group. And it's the same thing for the DBs here. So I look, it's like, yes, we had mentioned Mansour Delane, we're mentioning Gerard McCoy, but there's some other corners that I think the difference between these two guys, and let's just say the corner from Clemson with Terrell, and the other corner from Tennessee with Hood and Chris Johnson from San Diego State, there are so many guys here at especially DBs, linebackers, but I could even say the edges for one that could start and make an impact either as a slot or they could play as your second cornerback there, not on the primary target, or you could have a really nice safety kind of roll in and also play as some big special teams help or be kind of this rotational piece. And, I'm not even talking about, let's say, offensive line. I'll dive into it, A lot of people, I don't understand why this offensive line class, because it's not a sexy position group. Maybe that's why. But the tackle from Miami, Fanu from Utah, Kalen Proctor from Alabama has definitely risen up. The guard, Ione from Penn State. I don't understand why, but they're saying like this, the guard from Penn State is the best guard that we have probably seen coming out of the draft since your man got drafted to the Colts. And he's a phenomenal prospect. We haven't seen a guard like this since, the past 8 years. And then you're talking about tight ends. This is the tight end class that everybody's been salivating over, but nobody's talking about it because it's all been talked about Mendoza and Ty Simpson lately because that's what sells. But Kenyon Sadiq coming out, running a 4.39 at 6'3", 241. You got Eli Stowers coming from Vanderbilt running a 4.51 at 6'4". Sam Roush from Stanford a little bit slower, but you want to talk about 6'6", 267. You're blocking tight end that can be a threat on blocking or receiving. The whole point I'm trying to make is that this is potentially the draft that you don't be upset by potentially trading back because of the amount of talent at every single position here. Now, if you're looking for wide receiver, running back, quarterback, hey, obviously you're a little bit more limited this year. But this could be this draft class that doesn't have a lot of exciting names, but we end up talking about it 5 to 7 years down the road where it's like, man, look at how many guys made a Pro Bowl. And I know that doesn't mean as much now, but how many guys are an All-Pro from this class that came from the second round or the third round now? I'm excited for this draft class because it's not a sexy class, but I'm like, dude, there are so many great players coming out on the defensive side of the ball. And when you're a team like the Titans who need a lot of help on defense, I'm very excited to see where we take some of our picks to pad out. And that's why I'm okay with taking an offensive weapon with our 4th overall pick because I think there's a lot of talent in the back later half of the draft, on day 2, day 3 of the draft.
Yeah, I totally agree. This draft is one of the deepest I possibly remember. And I know we've brought up the 2013 draft a number of times. I want to emphasize, I think we're both kind of talking about the 2013 draft from the quarterback perspective, because there's obviously been other drafts that are deeper, et cetera, et cetera. 2011 draft comes to mind. You're able to get guys. Obviously Cam Newton went number 1, but you have J.J. Watt and a number of other really, really, really good players going later in that draft, and you zoom out and it's like, oh, this is one of the best drafts we've ever seen. I think this draft is kind of in that class, potentially, with the level of talent you have here at a lot of these positional groups. One dude I want to shout out really quick is I don't know if I'm going to say his name right, but Oregon safety Dylan Thinneman. I really like him. Could be the heir apparent to Harrison Smith, maybe for the Minnesota Vikings. That could be a little fun. I know. I just think that could be really interesting. He's a good player, and I really like Oregon. I think taking Oregon prospects generally works out for people lately. So I just want to give him a shout out.
How about a white safety that runs a 4.35?
Ain't that something, man?
That's insane.
I know. Ain't that something? Like, what was that one guy? Do you remember Troy Apke from a couple of years ago? I think he played for Washington. That guy ran. Did he go to? Oh, this guy was not a DB, but what's his name? Andy Isabella. He played for the Cardinals. You remember him, the wide receiver? We're on the come up, man. Like these guys are different now. They're different now. We got the NBA coming up. We've had baseball. Now we're getting some guys here in the NFL. It's nice time to be, I guess, a fast white guy going to pro sports. So anyway, he's just Dylan Thinneman is just one guy in a sea of really, really, really good players. Some of these other, I want to shout the offensive linemen. Spencer Fano from Utah, I think is going to be a really good player. Obviously, you have some other guys here going to the top. Our friend Francis M. Is going to be a top 10 pick. I think he's going to be really good. And when we, like you were saying, zooming out, we're really going to have some good players entering the league here. And I want to talk about one more team before we move on, or if you have anything else to say. We kind of, got teams like the Browns, we kind of know what they're doing. Teams like the Giants, we kind of know what they're doing here. It's not too obvious. Titans, we talked about them already. Cardinals, not super interesting. We think the Jets are going to take Arvell Reese, and then the Raiders obviously are going to take Fernando. So what teams or team are kind of up in the air? Like, what's interesting? And we were talking about Carnell Tate. I think the Saints are one of the most interesting teams in the NFL this offseason. And we know their quarterback situation is unorthodox with Tyler Shuck. But I really like Tyler Shuck, and if he's able to stay healthy, I think he is a good player. You saw him come on at the end of the year. But the Saints don't have a lot of wide receiver depth. They have Chris Olave, who I think is a really good player. I had him in fantasy last year. I really like him. Well, what if the Saints took Carnell Tate, or maybe even reached and took Mekhi Lemon or Tyson, one of these players? What do you think about that? What do the Saints really need to address, in your opinion? Or would you be happy if they ended up taking a wide receiver there?
I feel like in terms of all the teams in the top 10, the Saints are definitely the one where it's like, I have no idea which way they could go, because they could go anyway. They definitely could take wide receiver. They could take one of the big three that are coming out. They could pad up some of that offensive line if they wanted to, help Shuck out. They could go. I do think, to make the long answer short, is that because they had lost a couple guys on that defense that have been historically with them for years and years, that they do go towards the defensive route to find a really good young piece to be a staple hold for that defense for a long time. And they're just at that perfect spot at pick 8, unless somebody does something crazy, that they're going to have an option available to them, whether that's Caleb Downs or Reuben Bain or Sonny Style. Like, one of those guys is going to be there. They are just at the point where, hey, the Bengals have the opportunity where they may not get anybody. I would like to think that the Saints are at the potentially the safest spot where it's like, okay, we don't have to trade up or trade down because we're going to get one of these guys. We like them all. We are at that 8th pick, and we're assuming quarterback's going here, and we're going to hope the Browns go offense because that makes the most sense. Tennessee maybe is a little bit of a wild card, but it seems like Love's a staple hold. But even then, let's just say if Tennessee did go defense, or if they went wide receiver and messed it up, whatever it might be, I think the Saints are content. I do think that they would take the best available, whether that's, I'm going to say, Reuben Bain or Caleb Downs, because I don't think any of the linebackers coming from Ohio State's going to make it. I don't think David Bailey's going to make it, so I could see, those three guys being in there. I'd go defense just because of, they lost their I'm having a brain fart with the linebacker right now that's played with them forever. He went to the Jets, and we know that their defensive end, who, once again, brain fart, but he's in the Tide commercials if you haven't seen it, where his mom says that he stinks. And that is not the best way to describe it. But my point is that the veterans that they've had on this defense are either started to move on to other teams, and they're near retirement age. So, hey, take advantage of one of these best defensive prospects coming out, get them in that defense, maybe learn from those guys for a year or two before they end up retiring. So I think they go defensive, but I'm not upset if they go offensive line or wide receiver, because that's where their team's at. It's like, hey, we just need talent.
Yeah, the Saints have a luxury of, this is kind of a luxury pick for them. They're in the best spot in the draft because you kind of know they're in the best spot of the second tier of the top 10 here, I think, certainly. And I'm very interested to see where they go, because I think with the age of Tyler Shuck, they could be shifting into a more so win-now mode than you might expect, while maybe Shuck is a bridge for somebody in the future. But I think genuinely, and I'm going to state this definitively, is that if he stays healthy, I believe you can win that division with Tyler Shuck at quarterback. And I think they could win it as early as next year. And I don't feel like I'm exaggerating. I don't think that is a far-fetched thing to say, in my opinion. Now, there's still, the Falcons are reshuffling. They could be good. They have a lot of talent. I think the Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield getting healthy again. The Panthers are kind of in this stressful win-now mode. It's going to be tough. But I do think with everything the Saints have, they could win the division this year. And I think if they're able to get a good player at this spot, whether that's on offense or defense or offensive line, like you were saying, they're going to be in a key position to win this division. Anywhere else you want to hit here?
No, I think we covered everything that I wanted to. This is kind of like an overlook day, or an overview, I should say. Maybe talk about some individual prospects. I do think as we get close to the draft, we've done this maybe not in detail before, but we have each made our own mock drafts, and I was thinking about potentially maybe when it gets to draft time, we each make a mock draft where we play as the GM for the first round of every team being drafted, and we almost do like basically, hey, with the first pick we do this, and each one of us gets 60 seconds or whatever it might be to be like, here's who they pick, here's why, here's da-da-da-da-da, and then we'll kind of flip back and forth. So we'll kind of do maybe like a live, potentially something like that, like a live draft with each other right there. I think that could be fun. Almost do it like a, who's the guy? Is it Berman? Chris Berman for ESPN that always did like the highlight reel stuff.
Yes.
Back in the day.
Fastest
like,
2 minutes or something.
We're gonna do like the fastest minute for each pick. Sitting here, be like, we'll play the music the entire time. We'll be, turning blue in the face. We'll have, our lungs collapse by the 10th pick. But I think that could be something fun to do. That'll put us on the spot.
Yeah, that'll be fun. But with everything being said, let's move on to our next topic here. And I think this is going to be more of riffing, but the NBA recently announced that they are considering expanding the total number of teams in the league from 30 to 32. The NBA Governors Board recently approved a vote for the league to explore bids and applicants for expansion teams exclusively in Las Vegas and Seattle, Washington. So that was a few days ago, Shams, March 25th. NBA could expand here. Well, is this going to happen? When was the last time it happened? I think the league currently is examining how like how they should pursue this, because I don't know. I think expansion makes sense, but I also think it doesn't make sense. Wow, real hot take there. Real great analysis. I think on one hand, there is enough talent in the league to reasonably expand the league, give Seattle and Las Vegas 2 more teams. I think that makes sense. Now, from a monetary standpoint, both of these teams are going to everybody, I think, is going to have to pitch in, all the owners, and they're going to end up getting a certain $1 billion fee given to their franchise, because the new prospective new owners or ownership groups have to pay a certain entry fee, and then that's split amongst the rest of the teams. But as far I don't want to get into the weeds on all of this. I think it would be cool to have 2 more expansion teams in the NBA. I think it'd be really cool to get the Seattle Supersonics back, which is what everybody's clamoring for. Not as excited about a Las Vegas team. I think Las Vegas is kind of a soulless sports city. I don't hate the Raiders being there. I really dislike the Oakland Athletics moving there. And I think the hockey team's cool. It's fine. It makes sense. NBA, I could see the NBA operating in Las Vegas and it being fine, but it's still, there's other cities that I think would be cooler if they had one. But the league for the longest time, they wanted a team in Las Vegas, and I think these are the 2 markets where it's probably going to happen. Now, what I thought we could do here is talk about potential places, maybe a place or 2, where the NBA should look besides Seattle or Las Vegas. And the first one I want to talk about is Louisville. Louisville is a basketball crazy city. They have a really nice arena, KFC Yum Center, that was built specifically for the Louisville Cardinals basketball team. It's a state-of-the-art arena that's probably nicer than many, many, many arenas in the NBA. I'm going to be frank here. It's right on the river, and it could definitely host an NBA team if the opportunity was presented. Now, I think the other aspect of this that's interesting for Louisville is the historical one. They used to have the Kentucky Colonels back in the 70s of the ABA. The Kentucky Colonels did not end up making it into the NBA, but they were a very successful ABA franchise. There's kind of some history there. And Louisville is one of the most basketball crazy cities in the United States. I think the fans there would be very, very, very receptive to a potential NBA expansion team. I think it fits the kind of profile of the city a lot more than even some cities that have NBA teams currently. And I think it would be an overwhelming success if it moved to Louisville. Now, I think one of the things that is preventing Louisville is the corporate base there in the city. I think a lot of money and corporations have been either scaling back operations within the city or outright leaving. I think in 2010, Louisville was home to Papa John's corporate, which at that time was growing. It has since moved to Atlanta, I believe, or Texas, one of the two. They also have Yum Brands, which is KFC, Taco Bell. It used to be Long John Silver's, A&W, but KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut primarily. They're a big kind of Pepsi partner in the food space. That was a big fast food conglomerate, which is also what the KFC Yum Center is named after. And then finally, you have health insurance giant Humana, which is a Fortune 500 company, the only one in Kentucky that is headquartered in the Bluegrass State. So the corporate base around Louisville is not that strong. I think when people compare Louisville and Cincinnati has a little more historic stuff. They have a lot more brands to play off of. P&G is famously from here. Kroger. You have you have a broad healthcare system. You have a university you can play off of, just like Louisville does. And then you have kind of your regional restaurant partners and those kind of things. But they have more corporate money in Cincinnati they can kind of play with. Cintas is a big one. They used to have Chiquita. Louisville it doesn't have that as much. And I think that could be a big issue in recruiting a potential NBA franchise. Cincinnati doesn't really have a lot of billionaires. I think they have like 2 or 3. They have the Lindner family, and then they have old guy like August Trundle of MedPace, and maybe like another dude. But they really don't have too many like individual billionaires. But I don't think Louisville really does either. And with the NBA and how expensive these franchise fees are, I think it's going to be really tough to find a group willing to spend that kind of money to kind of roll the dice on Louisville. But I do think if that was to happen, I think it would be an interesting place to have a team. I think it would be an unmitigated success, and I do think it would totally work. And I think the fans and people of Kentucky would really like it, especially the citizens of Louisville. They are a sports-hungry city, and I think it would make a lot of sense for the city to have a basketball team. And it would, to me, it would kind of like be the Thunder. I mean, it would just be a total layup. These fans would show up. It would be a core part of the city's identity moving forward in a way that if a team was in Las Vegas, it just wouldn't be the same. Seattle, that's a layup. That's a home run. Seattle loves sports. Seattle's a great town. Vegas, it's not really doing it for me, and I think Louisville or some other team could be a better possibility. What about you? What do you think about Louisville? What do you think about expansion? And do you have a city that you think could potentially be a interesting expansion city?
I think the expansion overall is a good idea for the league. I think this could be something that could lead to a little bit of a shakeup, to some of how stagnant maybe the league has been in terms of changes, and some people complaining about the product. Well, it's like, oh, okay. The last expansion technically was back in '04 with the Charlotte Bobcats. And definitely the rules are going to be different then. I did kind of look up some of the rules back then where it was like, hey, the 29 other teams at the time were allowed to protect 8 players, and anybody else was basically free pickings, and that includes the salary attached to them. And then, of course, there are kind of some limitations on where they can be drafting in the draft, to where they were like at the 8 pick or the 9 pick, or, they're not given the first pick overall. And then apparently, like, the expansion teams at the time, based on their former collective bargaining agreement, was like, oh, you can have 2/3 of the cap that every other team has. And then the second year, you can have 80%. And the third year, you're finally fully into the cap. So it's going to be different to see how the NBA shakes this up to, it's like, hey, now you're letting in 2 teams. Now, at the same time, what are you going to do about the draft? Is this potentially a way that you could change the draft rules to fix tanking? This could be an excuse to make that happen. Could this be a way for you to maybe make some adjustments in the cap? Or maybe free agency hasn't been super exciting the past couple years. Maybe this is a way to shake it up a little bit. How many players are you going to allow to be protected? So this is a very interesting motion, because let's just say in our lifetimes, the only expansion we really had to where, let's just say, we were understanding of what was going on was with the NHL, with Las Vegas. We really haven't had that with baseball. We definitely haven't really had that with the NFL, because, when they brought in the Jaguars, and we were very young, not old enough to know what's going on. So this is exciting for me, the prospect of it, because I'm like, I've never really seen a sport that I've had some investment into at some point going to an expansion. This could be something that brings me back into it. Maybe it brings other people who have strayed from the NBA back into it, just to see what's going on here. In terms of the city, Seattle is a slam dunk. That's an obvious one. The Supersonics are one of those. It's their uniforms, the history that they have. It is a part of NBA history. They should have never lost their franchise, but that's what happens when money and who's trying to pay for a stadium happens, and it happens. But now it's, hey, you got an NHL team now. I would presume that you're going to play at that same arena. It kind of all works out. With Louisville being a potential city, because I agree Seattle's going to get theirs. Las Vegas, man, do they really deserve all the sports all at once? I feel like they're getting every single damn sport franchise they can in a period of 5 years. I don't know if I like that, especially for a city. I'm like, is Las Vegas really that big? Or are you just trying to like, oh, we get a lot of tourism, so anybody will stop and see? And I don't know. I don't feel like that's a lot of investment from your community. Whereas Louisville, when we say Louisville, I think maybe some of us that grew up in the area in Kentucky or just in the greater Cincinnati area, I'm like, don't think about it as like your Louisville, whatever, pick your Louisville Kings or whatever the hell they decide to name if it were to happen. This is the Kentucky basketball team. You are also pulling from people maybe in southern Indiana, maybe some people in Missouri, some people in Ohio and Cincinnati potentially. But I'm like, if you can even capture 50% of the fervor from BBN and Louisville basketball, collegiate basketball, you will have a very successful franchise. And you're right, the Yum Center is a fantastic venue. It can definitely support an NBA franchise. And it's such a unique location to where it's like you have a team in Tennessee, you have a team in northern Ohio, you have a team in Indiana. You're in this kind of land where, hey, it's a basketball. It's a big basketball fandom in the country, but you don't have any type of investment in that area in the professional sports scene. So you're kind of just pulling guys, and most people just care about college basketball. But you give them Kentucky, their first professional sports team, you don't think they're going to kind of wrap themselves around that, attached to the hip. They're going to fall all over it. So I think that could be a slam dunk to where it's like, hey, you got a smaller franchise like Oklahoma City, but you want to talk about a franchise that has the strongest attendance, for compared to so many other these larger teams, larger city teams. Yeah, the Thunder is a slam dunk for the league. I don't see any reason why Louisville, if you can get Kentuckians or just people around it to invest in their only professional sports franchise, I think they would dive all in. I think that would be a great move. My nomination, or a nomination that came to my head, and I can't tell you the financials behind it, but Pittsburgh came to mind. And Pittsburgh, I would not say is a basketball city, but this is a city that, and the community really invests in its sports. And the reason why I'm thinking about Pittsburgh that jumps off the head here, it's like this is a state, Pennsylvania, can support two teams because they already do it. The NFL, the NHL. You want to talk about a rivalry between the Flyers and the Penguins in the NHL? It's one of the most heated rivalries that you can have. So introduce basketball into it, and all of a sudden you might have a bunch of Pittsburgh people might be like, hey, guess what? In the NBA, there is no black and yellow team. You can keep the color scheme. All right? I know that's a stupid reason for me to bring up, but that's the fact of it. You can have a lot of people invested in the community, invest in this team really quickly, and it's like, listen, it's all set up. You can already have an instant rivalry. People get into it because it's Philadelphia, the 76ers, and, it's like, hey, you want to bring back some of the teams around, make it Indiana, whoever, whatever, Cleveland, whatever. You could introduce basically these existing sport rivalries back into the NBA and get a town invested in a team that it's like, hey, Steelers fans, some of the most famous fans in the NFL. Same thing with the Penguins. The Pirates, they suck. That's just it. But the Pirates did it to themselves. They have all the capabilities to be a wonderfully fan-invested franchise, but it's just one of the worst-run organizations in baseball. But if you do this thing right with the NBA, there's no reason why you couldn't have another successful franchise and quickly become somewhat of a cultural icon in that city and for the league itself. With how, if you can get that same type of, once again, fan base interest that Pittsburgh is known for into the NBA, that would be a huge win for the league.
Yeah, I agree. Pittsburgh is it's an amazing sports city, and it makes total sense to me, especially with PPG Paints Arena where the Penguins play, how they could so easily just move into that and it not be a problem at all, but already have like an energized fan base. And the other thing that's interesting about the NBA, and this is what Major League Baseball kind of tries to do, as opposed to the NFL is, and this goes, I think, pro Louisville, pro Pittsburgh, is that the NBA is very much an urban, like downtown core, like downtown centered game, and Pittsburgh has a great downtown, like a absolutely very walkable. There's a lot of hotels. Maybe there could be more if they moved in a team there, but people are coming from out of town to watch the Penguins regardless. That's a big draw there. And it's kind of centered around the downtown urban area. And I think if you move an NBA team in there, it's only going to help the downtown vibrancy. It would make a lot of sense. Pittsburgh's got a lot of good corporate they've got a big corporate base there to, get a lot of sponsorships and a lot of opportunities to make money. Louisville, not as much, but Louisville's is also downtown too. If you've ever been to downtown Louisville, it's very easy if you're in a hotel around there to get to the arena. It's just a few blocks walk. It's not too hard, and I think both of those cities would make a lot of sense in the grand scheme of things. I don't know kind of what ultimately. I mean, this is just kind of a fun exercise. I do think it's going to be Seattle and Las Vegas, unfortunately. Not unfortunately for Seattle, but definitely Las Vegas. I mean, like, why do they really need all of the teams? They're getting Oakland. Nobody. We honestly could have a whole episode on that. I went to Las Vegas not too long ago in November. Raiders were playing. I think still, in the season they were bad. Nobody was wearing Raiders gear. Nobody. I saw so much Dodgers gear. Like more Dodgers gear than I thought I saw more Dodgers gear in Las Vegas than I saw in Los Angeles, and it was filled with Dodgers gear in LA. Like filled. I saw more Dodgers stuff than Lakers stuff, which just goes to show you how baseball has kind of captured the zeitgeist over on the West Coast. But this isn't to gas up baseball necessarily. It just goes to show you how kind of transient of a town Las Vegas is for sports. I mean, the A's have such a rich history. I know Oakland, the stadium thing, that was a little different. Same thing with the Raiders, such a rich history, great fans, and now it just kind of feels like we're in Vegas. What else is there to do? Let's go to an NFL game, or let's go to a baseball game, or let's go to a hockey game, or potentially let's go to a basketball game. And honestly, like, this is another move by the NBA to get in bed with the degenerate gamblers, kind of, and really just monetize. The Las Vegas NBA team is going to be such an exercise in micro betting, micro transactions, really just bilking people for money, because I think it's going to marry the casino to pro sports in a way that I don't even think Major League Baseball or the NFL could really do, because I don't even know how to really describe it. I think it's going to be interesting.
I think the best way, all of these franchise, all these sports are in bed with Vegas, but the NBA has been the most transparent about it. They've been the most open with it. I don't think I've seen another league's commissioner be like, "Oh yeah, this is fantastic, love it." This is, besides. It's like, oh, we got one of our own players gambling. Oh, shit. I'm like, you're going to have it happen. Except in your NBA, you have teams basically saying, or not teams, you have individual players betting on themselves to go the under. And then the NFL, I feel like every time we've heard about the gambling, it's always like, hey, bet on me. I'm going to go off to, you haven't seen, or at least you haven't heard, but I would love to see, and we will probably never see the numbers on this, or it'd have to be some hardcore journalism, is how much money maybe Vegas is indirectly making these leagues just to have a franchise there. How much, because it's like, all right, we're getting all these sports teams in Vegas, but I'm like, in terms of popularity and like just in population, the number of people that live in Las Vegas, I'm like, well, I know there's other bigger cities out there. So I wonder what kind of deals are like, hey, if you move the franchise over here, you will get we'll get a percentage of this or that. How much is going underneath the table that honestly we'll never ever know. But, what's the revenue kickback to the leagues to allow bet MGM to bet your sport. Bet MGM has a huge stake in this casino, and they're like, well, if we can bring this here, it just makes me, it sounds conspiracy theorist, but I'm like, how much do the casinos play a role in getting franchises into their city? Because there's no way in hell, if you would ask, let's just say 20 years ago, when sports gambling was like you talk to your buddy Mike at the bar to do it, versus getting on your app or, whatever it might be, you would have never imagined a franchise, a sport franchise in Las Vegas. Because it's the Sin City. It doesn't really fit, So that is something I would really like to look into personally, not even just for the pod, but just for myself. Not that I'll get an answer, but it is kind of an interesting thought process. Be like, why is Vegas getting these sports franchises where so many other cities we think would be better, have more population, have supported already known franchises, and Vegas is just getting everything all in a 10-year time span?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to need to be some good journalism done on that. But we'd be sitting here and lying and saying if gambling didn't have anything to do with these teams relocating to the city. I could tell you from a Major League Baseball perspective, certainly the opportunity to make money from gambling sponsorships and the value of land and all of that. I mean, that's why they moved. That's why the A's did this, and they were willing to pay a bunch of money and get this stadium up off the ground and relocate this franchise, is because the ceiling to make money was so much higher and so much lower, like the barrier to entry to make all of these windfalls of cash from gambling and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you've ever been. Have you been to Las Vegas before?
I have not. I'd like to go at least once.
It's cool. I'd go again, certainly. I went last November, as I was saying. It was only for a couple days. And I actually thought it was really cool. It's something you can only do here and there. I didn't gamble a lot. But one thing I did not know, and the reason I'm bringing this up, is that did you know you cannot bet on DraftKings or FanDuel while you're in Las Vegas?
No.
I did not
go to the
know
casino.
that. They want you to go to the sports books their presence is everywhere. Maybe not necessarily like DraftKings or FanDuel, but like certainly Caesars, MGM, like those companies, their presence is everywhere. And I think there's some like local laws preventing the betting on your phone. It's like outlawed in Las Vegas because obviously the pre-existing casinos there want you to be in person at the sports book, blah, 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 blah. And I wonder I wonder how these like gambling, like the future of gambling at an in-person event, either a baseball game or a basketball game or a football game or a hockey game, how that's going to look going forward, how they're going to try to monetize the fans in attendance. If they can't do it digitally, maybe I just wonder how all this is going to look going.
I mean,
going
shit,
forward.
they do it at the Kentucky Derby. There's no reason why you can't do it in a stadium.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Live bets on, what the next pitch is going to be, but are you doing it on your phone, or they just want you to hang out at the the sports book that's in the stadium? One thing you'll notice very quickly about Las Vegas is when you go, and this is like obvious, but I don't think it like dawns on you until you're actually there kind of walking around, is that it is literally set up to like gradually take all of your money. I mean, it sounds like oh duh, but I'm not even talking about the gambling, the food, the hotels, the tipping culture, the nightlife culture, the alcohol, like the ATM fees inside the casinos, the little trinket shops, the more expensive like watch stores and clothing stores and shopping venues inside of these hotels and casinos are insane. And if you're obviously if you're looking to save money, you don't go to Las Vegas, but genuinely, like, you have to have like some kind of windfall of cash or a plan to go there. And I think using Vegas as a like sports tourism venue makes sense on its face, but I almost don't like the overtness of having the sports franchise there and it being kind of married to the gambling part of it. It feels like kind of a bridge too far. It's not that Vegas shouldn't ever have these franchises, but I think it with the way sports betting and sports gambling is like hitting you over the head now, and it's just part of being a sports fan. I'd almost like it to remain a little sacred in the ways we can have it. So anyway, that's my kind of little spiel here, but I'm almost certain Vegas is going to end up getting this team, and they've wanted it for a long time. And the NBA and gambling are like baseball and apple pie to the United States of America. And we are in the microtransaction culture now with Robinhood, investing on your phone, sports gambling on your phone, microtransactions in video games, on phone apps. You could have Tinder Plus if you're like dating. It's all crazy now, and I wish we could get away from that as a culture a little bit, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it's anytime you're watching any type of sport in general, let's just say throughout an hour, or let's say you're watching the first 3 innings of your baseball game, how many just betting commercials you're going to see. It's like, all right, now we got the betting commercials, the beer, and some type of medication because they think you're a middle-aged man who is in poor health and gambling his money away and likes to get drunk. Which,
what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
What did we have anything else on the docket today? I could not remember.
I wanted to talk about one more thing, and we were kind of talking about this before, and I'm not going to make it into a big baseball conversation, but I just wanted to mention this, and I thought it was interesting. So Major League Baseball has implemented its automatic balls and strikes ruling system, and I was at the Reds game yesterday. They were playing the Red Sox. Reds end up winning, and I'm getting like used to this in real time. Okay, so the umpire can get challenged on a call live in front of everybody, and there's this umpire named C.B. Buckner who's kind of got this infamous reputation among baseball fans, but regardless, C.B. Buckner was the umpire. Eugenio Suarez, Gino Suarez was at the plate. It's a crucial juncture in the game, and essentially what happens is if the umpire calls a strike that the batter thinks is a ball, the batter has the opportunity to turn around the umpire and challenge it, and then up on the big jumbotron, it'll show you the automatic ball and strike system like pitch. So essentially, it'll give you the strike zone, and it'll show you where exactly the pitch was caught or crossed through the zone or whatever. And it creates this like really interesting moment of suspense where, because all of these calls are close. It's not like the guy throws it up here and like way out of the zone, he challenges it. Like all of these are right on the line, essentially. And if a ball is like a millimeter in the strike zone, it is a strike, and it rules it a strike. So imagine you're there, and the batter challenges like 3 straight pitches in front of a packed house, like 45,000 fans, in a close game. Umpire gets like 3 calls in a row wrong, and every time the fans and this AI system are fact-checking this guy's homework live in front of everyone. It is insane. People are like, you could feel the suspense in the crowd, and then when like the ball would come in, it would show like 1 inch off the plate. Everybody's like, woo! And then the next one happens, and it gets even louder. And it's very, very interesting. I'm a fan of it. I like that they limit it to 2 per inning. I think if you get one challenge wrong, you get 2 challenges per inning, and then if you get one wrong, it eliminates one. Don't quote me on any of that. But there's a way that you're not able to like abuse it. But the way you can abuse it is if the umpire continuously makes bad calls, and then you you could just keep abusing that, because you don't get to, if you keep getting it right, you don't run out of them, essentially. So the Reds did that yesterday, and they were able to get quite a few more chances. The Yankees, Aaron Judge did that the other day, and he got another chance and hit a home run in the next pitch. So that's really crazy. Now, baseball purists will say that they don't like the automatic balls and strike system, and they don't like the pitch timer either, which is objectively incorrect, although I will hear arguments on kind of the soul of baseball type of thing. But one of the things that's interesting about baseball is that the margin for human error is kind of baked into the game, and one of the fun parts about baseball, although it's frustrating, is that each umpire has kind of their own zone that they consistently call throughout the game. And so maybe while the automatic balls and strike system has like this fixed strike zone, there maybe a guy is like calling it consistently like low strikes the entire game, and batters adjust to it throughout the game, and that's just kind of part of it. And I think it lessens the opportunity for that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it reduces outcomes, and that's where some fans have an issue with it. But as far as like a live entertainment product, being there in person and kind of seeing this play out is an unmitigated win, again, for Major League Baseball. I mean, their rules committee is on the biggest heater probably in pro sports history right now. I mean, genuinely. I watched a podcast with Van Leith, and I'm not going to throw the NBA under the bus again, but essentially, you guys have heard this conversation before. The NBA is over-optimized. They need to make some real rule changes that I don't think fans are going to be a big fan of. It's going to gimmicky. It's going to make the game kind of a gimmick. And with the 4-point line, or continuing the 3-point arc out of bounds so people can't shoot corner threes anymore, these foul rules, et cetera, all of that is in play. I think fans could revolt over it. Baseball, on the other hand, eliminated so much free time from the game. It has this ABS system, which is now like a game within a game. All these fans in the stadium looking at the Jumbotron, seeing if they could literally heckle the umpire in real time for being an idiot is crazy. Also, why would you ever, if this thing exists, would you ever be an umpire anymore? Like, it's insane. This is going to show up in the playoffs and actually impact games, and people are either going to love it or hate it, and that's ultimately good for baseball. So I just kind of want to give my spiel on the implementation of the automatic balls and strike system. And the last quick thing I'll say is it reminds me, and neither of you or I, you or I don't watch English Premier League soccer. I'm not a big soccer guy. I don't think you are either. They have this thing called the VAR system, which is essentially the English Premier League's version of what Major League Baseball did. So you can see in real time if like a ball crosses the goal line, because sometimes those calls are really close. Guy kicks it into a goal. It's like right on the edge. Do you call it a goal or not? Did it cross the line? Whatever. It's very polarizing among fans, but ultimately I think it's generated a lot of conversation. That's essentially Major League Baseball's version of that.
No, I mean, when you told it to me before we hopped on, I agree. I thought this was it makes sense for baseball. I think because you do mention, hey, you got a lot of different umpires and they all have different preferences and what their box should be and that inconsistency has made basically players and teams have to be aware of what umpire is working that day. I guarantee maybe they don't put a whole lot of energy into it, but I guarantee you the manager's like, hey, this guy's working the mound today, or, he is behind the catcher today. He likes to call it high and tight, whatever it might be. But now you have basically the players are able to fight back a little bit on potentially some inconsistencies with different umpires, and this could potentially make the umpires be like, well, I'm tired of getting calls made against me. Maybe they make a slight change in what they call their batter's box now. So that could be good for the game. I think this is kind of how do you impact let's just say the slight inconsistencies that you're having with the different umpires in the game? Well, now you've just given the players a tool to do that, because at this point the umpires could have called whatever they wanted to, and it could have been an egregious call, but guess what? The umpire called it. And now you have this challenge system in there, which is very, I think I like it from the sounds of it. Now, will it come back and will it piss off one franchise versus another franchise? Absolutely it will. But the point is like, hey, let's reinforce good calls in the league. You know, that's what a lot of people have for decades now have complained about. It's, oh, we lost this game because this umpire. Oh, this dude sucks. Da 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 da. You know, I hate when we get him on the mound. It's like, well, now you've given your players a reason to fight back, or a reason, not a reason, but a way to fight back. And maybe this makes the game more consistent. So maybe this system isn't used as much. So I think this could be a positive. I guess term is a positive feedback loop for umpires to make the game better called. And you're right, this is a game of human error, and MLB is doing a fantastic job of this balancing act of bringing in people, new fans, bringing in some fans like me who know how baseball ran, but I'm like, okay, I can actually watch a game and somewhat enjoy it. You know, I just told you before we hopped on, I saw the Braves and Royals games on TV sitting down at a restaurant, and I watched the whole thing, you know, just because it's, you know, it's going. I like the pitch count clock. I would have loved to have seen what you had mentioned, basically the batter's challenge. That would have been really cool. But baseball is doing the right things. I like it. This is a good thing. And I wish maybe this starts something with other sports. Maybe the NFL, maybe they implement something similar to this, to where it's a little bit more concrete, where it's like, hey, and there's been arguments we've heard the past 2 years about, should you be able to challenge what a pass interference is? And I'm like, I think we need to fix some shitty ref ball, because we've all seen a game or two throughout the season or in the playoffs where we're like, almost universally everybody disagrees with that call. And maybe we'll see this in other leagues that absolutely need it.
You know what? And my kind of final thought on this, and I think one of the reasons it works in baseball, and maybe not in football as much, or basketball, is it's so quick. Like this challenge, I mean, it maybe only takes like 10, 15 seconds. I think what happens in football, or especially basketball, football's not as much on this because so much is riding on it. So I understand the need to like take the time on these challenges. But some of these, like, you could challenge an out of bounds call or something in basketball, and they go to the monitor, and it disrupts the game for like 5 or 6 minutes. Baseball, for some reason, has found you would think these guys, it would be taking forever, and it's just like boom, quick
That's
hit
awesome.
like that. And you're right, we do need more of that if we're going to have this kind of stuff in pro sports. Not that everything needs to be a quick hit, speed up the game, but I want these kind of things to be efficient at the very minimum. I hate watching a college basketball game and the game is completely disrupted because of a so-so call, and it takes you out of the flow of watching the game, and then you got to watch a bunch of commercials and all of this stuff, and it kind of ruins it. And baseball, to its credit, this system seems to be a good thing. I'm sure there will be tweaks to it going forward, obviously, but yeah, football, the pass interference thing, it's like it's so dependent, right? Like, how much contact was there really? Like, how close was the throw to him? You know, was it an uncatchable ball or not? Was there hand play involved? Like, while the baseball is like more concrete. It's like, did this cross the line? Yes or no? I guess it's why it works in soccer too, even if there are critics of the system. And yeah, I wonder how football could utilize maybe some of that technology, because I do think the NFL is very, very, very good already, even with human referees, in judging the placement of a ball in terms of like a chain gang, or did this ball cross the goal line. I think that, to the credit of and umpires are pretty good too for the most part. People get upset, but that's just kind of baseball culture. But in football, I think I think they're more or less very, very good at doing that already. So I wonder where they would even attempt to implement that.
And I agree. I think overall they do a good job. And we saw it last season where they had a chain gang on the sideline, but they used the chip and the ball to determine if it was a first down instead of bringing the chain out, which I think was a good change because it's like, oh, no, we're bringing the chain out or, trying to stretch it out, make sure we're in the right place, get the moment with – it's like, oh, let me pull out the piece of paper and divide it. I'm like, that's the stupidest shit I think I've ever seen. But it's just, and it happens with baseball. It has happened with baseball where it's like, can you imagine, let's just say you're watching this, like, I'll just choose, I'm sorry to bring this up, but the Rams and Bengals Super Bowl where you're invested in this game for 58 minutes on the game clock. And then they call a shitty pass interference on Logan Wilson, and that's how the game ends. And it's like, all right, it's kind of a so-so call. Could have been challenged. But this one call, for the most part, decided the impact of the game. And you could talk about, oh, we could have done this right. But guess what? Me as a fan, guess what I'm thinking about, 3 years down the road. I think about that one call in that Super Bowl. I don't think about Cooper Kupp going. I don't think about Joe Burrow doing. I think about Logan Wilson getting a shitty call. And I can say the same thing about Philadelphia and the Kansas City Chiefs. I can do the same exact shit with too many big games where I'm like, hey, maybe in the regular season this isn't a thing. It is what it is. But I'm like, if you got the most amount of people in the playoffs or the Super Bowl watching your game, get the shit right. Because guess what? They're not going to tune out if you take 5 minutes into it because, like, hey, we're at the top of the top right now. I don't know. That's my opinion on that one where it's like, you know what? You're right. I don't want to take away from the game, but if we got to get it right when it's the Super Bowl, take as much time as you damn need. Because I don't want, I don't want to hear one team be like, oh, we lost because of the play call. No, I want to hear you say that you lost because of just didn't go your way or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. The other one that famously comes to my mind is the Saints-Rams NFC Championship game where the wide receiver got hit while the ball was kind of just like he just like essentially got trucked while the ball's traveling right over his head.
And it was a no call. I know exactly what you're talking about. And it was like,
Saints
that was the most blatant pass interference I think I've ever seen. They didn't call it.
Yeah, Saints fans were very upset. And they had a right to be upset. And honestly, it would have been the Saints-Patriots Super Bowl, I think, would have been a better Super Bowl, personally. And that's kind of what I was rooting for because it was like us never getting the Kobe-LeBron finals. It was the same thing. We never got a Drew Brees-Tom Brady finals, and that would have been really cool. But yeah, we could talk forever about the refs and technology and everything like that. But I think that's probably going to do it for today's episode. Unless you have anything else to add.
Nope, that's it, man. I think another good pod, another good topic, and shit, good pod. We'll finish it up and get ready for next week with whatever topics we decide to do or whatever the media gives us.
Whatever the media cycle gives us. Yeah, that's what we talk a lot about sports because there's a sports calendar and there's always something to talk about. We could talk about a lot of things. We don't want to pigeonhole ourselves into talking about a certain stories or certain things. Like we want you guys coming back for Logan and I kind of thing. And we really appreciate all of the listeners we have right now. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for listening. As always, we love you guys. Continue to like, comment, subscribe. Next week, you're going to hear Grant's intro, hopefully, and outro. That'll be really cool. But if you have anything else to add, I hope you guys have a great week.
Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening.